We're working on the third challenge in the float accumulators lessons. For this challenge, it asks us to write some code that'll calculate the final average of our number list, as well as tracking a rolling average of the values in that list. It wants us to have a variable that is called number average. That is the final average of the list, and then a rolling average variable, which is going to be a list called rolling average. So the first thing that we'll want to do is let's go ahead and just declare those variables. Let's say num average is equal to 0 and num, rolling average is an empty list. And then we know that we are going to iterate through our number list. So we can go ahead and set up our for loop here. Once we've done that, I'm going to actually going to call this number sum, and we'll worry about number average just a little bit later. So for my number sum, let's say number sum is plus equal to number. So that's going to give me my total, but then for the, let's call this current average, is going to be that num sum where it's at divided by the number of items, right? Number of items. But I don't have a number of items, and this is going to be a great place for our enumerate function. And by default, enumerate will give us an index value. So let's go ahead and call that IDX. And by default, it'll start at 0, but on my first iteration, I haven't checked 0 numbers. I have checked 1 number. So let's go ahead and give it the optional parameter, the second parameter, and have that go ahead and start at 1. And then I can go ahead and say, to get that current average, I'm going to divide my sum so far by the number of elements that I have counted, that I have included in that sum so far, which is the index coming from my enumerate. Then I'm going to want to rolling average dot append that current average. So here, right, what we're actually looking at here, this is actually a list accumulator. You can see we don't get to that for another couple of lessons, but we might as well have a little sneak preview here. And we can see that we're doing both a float accumulator in that we are accumulating a sum, as well as we are accumulating some items into a list using the dot append method, which we learned a few units ago when we were dealing with lists. So let's go ahead and finish this out. We're going to go through that, and then at the end, we're going to say that our number average, the final average, is going to be that num sum. It's actually just going to be that final current average. If I am correct, we can go ahead and run some tests here. I think this should pass. It does. There are some other ways we could do this. One thing that I'm going to look at, right? I could skip the middleman here with this current average variable, right? I could get rid of this current average variable, save a line of code, and still have everything working. Typically, when you do math inside as a parameter, you do not have spaces around the operator. Make that little change. And right then, current average is no longer there, so we would have to do num sum over IDX, or we could take the more traditional approach and say the sum of our num list divided by the length of our num list. And we can see that this will also give us a correct solution, just a little bit different. But what we're doing, right, is the two accumulators. We are accumulating a sum. We are calculating the average as we go and accumulating that into a list with a list accumulator. And then we are finally calculating the final sum. I think what's best for this exercise is to actually use that accumulator to calculate that final sum. That's it for this video. We hope to see you in the next lesson.